Hello, everybody. Aaron Lelito here with our new episode of the Wild Roof podcast. And today I have a new guest for us, and her name is Gabriela Blandy. I feel like we're just gonna have to dive into the deep waters pretty quickly with Gabriela today, and perhaps you'll see why in just a second. Gabriela is an award-winning writer, qualified NLP and life coach, breathwork facilitator, and chakra yin yoga teacher, as well as a shamanic practitioner. And the connection point between Wild Roof Journal and Gabriela was her writing prize, which is called Wild Muse. So we'll definitely cover that. It's a nature writing prize, and that's going to be, I feel like, a good crossover point between what Wild Roof does and what Gabriela does. So stay tuned for that. But before we get too far along, Gabriela, I'll hand it to you for a little more of an extended introduction. And if you could just say, like, out of those items that were listed in your bio, where are you at now? Do you have a primary focus in terms of what you're doing now, today, this month, this year, anything like that?
Well, firstly, Aaron, thanks for having me. I know a little bit about the Wild Roof Journal, and I really love what you're doing. I love the space that you're holding. There's such an invitation for writers who are really expressing what they truly want to express. And sometimes I feel that there aren't enough places for that creative safety, so to speak. So, yeah, really just celebrating what you're doing as well. In terms of where I'm at, I feel very much at a really beautiful place in my creative practice. So that is largely writing. I have a novel which I'm just about to go on submission with, so that's fiction. But I also have a non-fiction book proposal that I'm working on, which is definitely emerging of what I've learned from nature, my connection with nature, and also what I've learned from my work as a facilitator, all the different facilitator hats that I wear working with writers. So it's a real combination of the journey that we can take within our own landscape, how that can be facilitated by the outer landscape, with that ultimate destination to find that true creative voice that is within us all. So yeah, that's a little highlight of where I'm at right now.
Awesome. Are you able to say a little bit about the maybe just the premise of the novel you got in the works?
Sure. So really the question it's asking is from the central female character. She is given an opportunity to have the life that she's been dreaming of, but it actually belongs to somebody else. And that person has recently gone missing. So she's in this quandary of, do I do the work to find out what happened to this other woman, or do I just rub my hands together and step into her place? And it's set in the theatre world in Mexico. I used to live in Mexico. I used to work as an actress. And it's really asking the question, the sort of three layers. The person, as a creative, we often find ourselves growing up in a family that may not support that creative urge that we have within us. And so it's got three layers of, I suppose, personal inquiry. There's the person that I felt I should be. There's the person that other people felt that I should be. And then there's the person that I truly want to be. So that's the question, and then the premise is that she is potentially stepping into a role that belonged to another woman who went missing, but she kind of realizes she wants this whole woman's life.
Wow, yeah, I think that's such a rich territory to investigate. Even just the inner world of the creative person can be interesting.
I could spend all year in that place, Aaron, literally. It amuses me far more than a Netflix box set, that's for sure.
Right, right. Yeah, so like the exactly, yeah, like the artist in society and then like yeah, run with that for a little bit. So yeah, there's lots of good tension points
Yeah.
that I'm just imagining based on what you said, what different directions it can go. That's excellent.
Hmm.
And then as far as the nonfiction book that you mentioned, are you able to share a little bit about the premise on that one?
Sure. The title was something that came really early for that. Tree in your spine, cage in your heart. And really, what it's speaking to is life force energy that flows through all of us and it comes up that central system. So, as a chakra yoga teacher, I'm very much use that energetic map as a foundation for much of my work and much of what I teach. So, this understanding that there is energy flowing through us, and that is the foundation of our creativity. So, that's the tree in our spine, this natural sense, this really true innate desire to manifest whatever it is we want to create. We feel it, we feel the invisible experience of the energy, and then we turn it into something tangible. And then the cage in the heart really refers to how our upbringing can really be in direct opposition to that. And so, what it often does is it closes our heart so that force that wants to rise up through us, when it reaches our heart, it can often get stuck. It can often get turned into something else, what I think someone maybe wants to hear rather than what I really want to be speaking. And the cage in the heart is also about how we can be really afraid of what it is we truly desire. Because again, often when we express our emotions, we express our desires as young children, we might be given the messaging of I want never gets, or I bet you wish that you want that, but that's completely inappropriate. So often we have this conditioning that our desires are unwanted, unreasonable. And so that cage also comes about to really restrict that urge or that desire within us to be the creative that we want to be or to be the person that we want to be. I used to run a retreat for writers, and I can't tell you how many writers would talk about the life of a writer and it being a life where you had to really compromise and sacrifice. And this was about 15 years ago, but Aaron, even then I had an intuition that that was not truth. That was a reality that we were trapped in. And I think my journey since then has been to find a way to teach people that actually, when you use your imagination, you can actually start to create a completely different experience as a creative and basically step out of that cage and just be the tree.
I can see a lot, I guess, a lot of similarities there between the two. Maybe we can just kind of talk a little bit about the writing prize. I mean, like, what's the connection? So you're clearly interested in your own writing. So for you, like, what's the connection of this thing called Wild Muse? So like, what role do you see Wild Muse playing in this mixture of your interests?
Mm. Funnily enough, actually, when I was looking at the Wild Roof Journal, I was curious about how that had started for you because it seemed like such an inclusive place. And I wondered if you had had an experience of being someone who wanted to find that place. And so you just decided to create it yourself. And that's really what underpins the Wild Muse Prize. I would say 5 years ago now, as I was just about to discover breathwork, I had a very profound experience in nature that was very spiritual, far more spiritual than any experiences I'd had thus far, even though I've done a lot of shamanic training and I've learned a lot of incredible ceremonies. This sort of made all of the others look quite tame. I've never felt the call to use psychedelics. A lot of people who walk the shamanic path get called by ayahuasca or get called to use some kind of plant medicine. I've always really trusted that I can reach an altered state just by coming into relationship with nature, and that happens for me. But this experience I had in nature was really off the charts, and it really made me understand how deeply and profoundly nature knew me. And when I started to write about going down that path, this new apprenticeship that I was on, learning from the trees, really learning what they knew of me, and through that, learning about myself. And I was writing about that. I was writing essays. And then I started to look for where I could submit this. And I was thinking, well, I guess I'm a nature writer now. And I just didn't see a place that was calling for spiritual nature writing, or people who are writing about nature but with no teaching. I was thinking, I don't know the names of plants. I don't know the names of most animals. I certainly couldn't listen to a bird and tell you which bird was singing to me. I don't know really about agriculture. I don't know about the climate. I don't know about rocks. So I felt like I was writing about nature, but in this very unacademic way, in this very unstructured way. A lot of my writing as a fiction, as my fiction writing was really influencing it. And I did submit my work to a few places and just didn't find anyone who was, it was often, this is beautiful, but it's just really not the kind of thing that we publish. So I thought to myself, I can't be the only one. I can't be the only one who's writing about their relationship to nature in a more magical, spiritual, soulful way. And so I think I first began the prize just to sort of see, is there anybody else out there, and to basically find a way to celebrate them, because I felt that that's what I needed. I needed for somebody to say this writing is really necessary. And I had no idea how many people would submit. I was like, maybe it'll be one, or maybe I'll be completely overwhelmed. I had no idea. So that was really where it started. And this is the second year that I'm running it. I mean, the first year just really showed me there's so much demand for this space, and the feedback that we had was really lovely. So we've literally just opened doors for the prize this year, and the submissions have already started coming in. I think it took several weeks last year before we began to have submissions, but literally I was so thrilled to see that, like, the day after we opened the doors, we had submissions coming in. So it really feels like absolutely the right step to have made.
Perfect. Yeah, that's that's such a good story of like the connection point of Wild Muse and that prize came, I guess, at least part of it came from kind of your own desire as a writer to like, I need a space like this, like you said at the beginning of that response.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was actually not too long ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with somebody, which may or may not lead to a podcast recording. Hint, hint. But during that conversation, at the end of it, I think I kind of landed on that very thing of like, oh, I just wanted to be a part of a place like this. So that's why, it's not like, not to oversimplify.
Yeah, I was so curious about that.
Yeah, not to oversimplify it, but I mean, there was that desire of like wanting something like some kind of like supportive mechanism of creative people that is not based on, you know, maybe, an individual like selling their own work. It's like I'm an artist and I need to like sell my painting. That was pretty clearly like not something I was interested in or not comfortable with or whatever. And that's not a slight on people who do that. That's just my thing. That's not my comfort zone or interest. So that was kind of the turning point. I was like, oh, what if I do this for other people? That's a lot easier for me. It's like, look at this person's work. It's awesome. Check it out. Where do that for myself was just, it is a common thing for like self-promotion can get a little bit weird. But that was that turning point to say, oh yeah, that is like a comfortable space for me. And my background's in education and teaching, so there is this kind of parallel where like, yeah, you use the word facilitator as some of your roles, so that was a comfortable role for me. That was coming from being a teacher and saying, yeah, it's about you learning this. It's not about what I think. And teaching writing specifically, it's like, yeah, it's not about me telling you what to write and what I think about these topics. It's about you expressing what you think about the topics. That's the learning experience. So, yeah, kind of all of these things were kind of in a big mix.
I love that. It makes me think, Aaron, how often we've got this creativity flowing through us, and we might get messaging to say, this is what you do with this. You create a picture and then you sell it. And we're kind of trying to fit into that space because it kind of seems right. It's like, well, yes, I am creating images, and there are other people creating images and they're doing that and then they're selling it. But I think when we make that really true creative journey for us, we allow ourselves to be just nudged a little bit into the alignment that fits our particular form of creativity, which is, oh, so rather than promoting myself, I'm creating a space. It feels great to be promoting other people. And of course, in a way, you still get to be part of that group. So you're not invisible, you're still promoting yourself, but it's like, I want to promote a group rather than just an individual. And it makes sense because if you think about what we've all we've evolved from tribes where everyone had very specific roles. No one was doing exactly the same role. And yet now in society, there's this tendency to look at maybe the people who are most popular or the people who are being the most successful and think that we should be doing their role rather than actually, what do I sense my role is here? What do I sense this creative urge is asking from me individually? So yeah, it really sounds like you found your place. I love that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm glad it made sense. But I think that is such a true to my experience, at least, of like, even though it's kind of different to say, like, check out Wild Roof Journal, it's great. Like, that still is my thing in a way.
Yeah.
Like, it's still the same. And that's why I said it's like there's no slight on people just doing what they're doing in terms of self promotion. It's still it's still that, but yeah, it is there's kind of a little sidestep and a little bit of a buffer,
Mm.
and yeah, more of a collective and collaborative environment. But so yeah, all those things were at play and make it interesting for me. Never a dull moment is kind of one of my. I feel like it's a phrase I use a lot these days. We do need to like tell people the details of like how to submit. So while we're on the topic of the Wild
Okay.
Muse Nature Writing Prize, and you mentioned submissions are open, and you're as we speak getting submissions sent. So for people interested in submitting, what should be submitted? How? Maybe just a few of the details for our listeners.
Beautiful. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, the submission window, we're open until September the 15th, 9 p.m. UK time. So there's plenty of time to put something together. And we're asking for pieces that are up to 2,000 words. And there's a couple of really great British nature writing prizes, but they're asking for book proposals or essays that are several thousand words. So again, this was me thinking about a place where I felt my writing was fitting into more of a short burst of an experience rather than something that goes on for longer, and certainly not book form. And also, I feel that that shorter length, it makes it accessible to someone who may not necessarily call themselves a writer, but is writing about their experiences. I can't tell you how many posts I'm reading on Instagram and I'm thinking, oh, wow, this person is really able to put their experience into words. So that was in the back of my mind. People who are holding this creative space that's connecting with the natural world, but might be daunted by having to enter in something longer. So we're asking for anecdotes or personal stories. It can have a bit more of an essay format. We had short stories last year as well, so something that was completely fictional. We had memoir stories, so personal stories, but they were told like a story. And then to the other end of the spectrum, where people were talking more with an essay voice and giving information. We had some poems last year. We had a gorgeous poem that made the long list. So it's very broad. The thing that underpins it all is that when I'm reading the piece, I have to have a sense that there's something being spoken to me about the way that nature and humans connect. So something about nature's healing or nature's wisdom. So that's the theme of the competition: nature's healing and nature's wisdom. So again, it could be that someone is experiencing an aha moment when they're in nature, or it could be more that they are coming into nature and they almost feel like a little portal has opened up and nature is like directly transmitting something to them. It could be a beautiful learning. So again, really, really diverse, but nature's healing and wisdom. And the application can be done via my website, but also on Substack. What we're doing is we're just really supporting the journey at the moment. So we're putting out interviews from last year's winners to hopefully inspire people, and some content to really get them thinking. And of course, my own nature writing is on the Substack as well. I certainly know from entering competitions myself, it does help to have a sense of the style of someone who's on the reading panel. So certainly reading a little bit about the style of Wild Muse will help. And we've also published the winning entries from last year, so people will be able to see, okay, which ones got chosen. There's an entry fee of £10, and that money goes towards the prize money. So the first prize is 750, second prize is 300, and third prize is 150. And there are bursaries as well. So we do offer 10 bursaries, because I certainly don't want people to think that's prohibitive. I wouldn't be able to pay that entry fee. So there's details about the bursary on the website as well. Hopefully that covers everything.
And just to clarify, it is open to submitters in the US.
All around the world, yeah. We had such a diverse range of entrants last year. It was so beautiful to read about nature across the world. So yeah, worldwide. We do ask that the pieces haven't been published, so that's really important. But if you've been published, you can enter the prize. Lots of people are asking that, because some prizes say if you've been published, you can't enter it. So anybody can enter it as long as they fit the guidelines, as long as they don't put their name on the entry, and as long as the piece hasn't been published elsewhere.
Excellent. Yeah. And the website, and I'll put a link, of course, is gabrielablandy.org. And the Substack is under your name as well, Gabriela Blandy.
Yeah.
.substack.com.
Yeah.
So links will be provided, and yeah, check it out. But it's good to know too, and that is a theme of, I think, quite a few of the editors I've spoken with in the podcast format so far, is they do encourage people who haven't been published before. It is not something where a publication history is considered or significant or necessary even. Like you said before, a space for people interested in it, curious about it, and maybe looking for an initial publication, looking for somewhere to send their work. That might be a good fit.
Yeah, and
that's always important.
It gives such a boost, Aaron. We heard from people who were long listed last year. One of the writers shared with me that it was literally one of the first things she'd ever written. And so, imagine how validating that is, to have written something, to sort of, be the snail coming out of your shell and to already get a high five. So she really shared that that had just absolutely changed her life, because she'd always wanted to write but had held herself back. One of the other long listed writers hadn't written for years, and certainly not written in this kind of way. They felt very nervous about writing this kind of content. So it's hugely validating. It's always a bit daunting to enter, but just so worth it. And what we did, because we had so many incredible entries, what we've been doing is we've been sharing little snippets of other entries that didn't make the long list, but we also just loved. Like when you can only choose 20 and you have a few hundred entered, it doesn't, even if you loved 100 of them, you can only choose 20. So what I decided was, on the Instagram account, at Wild Muse Prize, we just, each week we just share a quote from another of the entries that we really loved. So we're just trying to shout out as many people as possible who are writing about nature in this really beautiful way.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And yeah, I think it just kind of plays into the kind of the welcoming nature that you're providing for the prize too. Because it can be intimidating to say, well, it's not just about getting submitted, like out of whatever, a dozen pieces or 20 that might go into an issue or even more. One winner, that could be a little bit of a hump to get over. So
Yeah,
that softens it, I think, and that's a nice touch.
thank you.
And one question I wrote down, and I think it's relevant to the prize, and maybe you can speak to it in your own writing too. And it is like a balance, maybe, is the what came to mind, of engaging with the natural world and also wanting to offer something useful. You mentioned I think the word teaching, like there's kind of like a teaching happening through the writing, and balancing that with like not overdoing it or being didactic or heavy-handed, as a point of curiosity, I suppose, on my end, because so much great nature writing does have that lesson embedded in it. Um, and so much of it, so much of it can go awry, I suppose, um, in terms of being a little bit too heavy-handed in that lesson. So how would you respond to that in terms of navigating that balance?
Mm. Yeah, I love this, Aaron. You're obviously familiar with the teaching that comes with fiction writing, which is asking the writer to really give a sense of showing the reader something rather than telling them how it is. And I found that when I first started to experience the teaching that I was getting from nature, what was happening to me is I wasn't just being told something. It wasn't like I was sitting by a tree and there was this voice in my head saying, you need to live life like this. But what was happening is I was sitting with a tree and I was having physical experiences in my body. I was often seeing things in my mind. And as a result of that, thoughts were arising. And then as a result of that, I was making changes in my life. So it really, that whole experience taught me about the layers of experience there are when we come into nature. So I think the balance for me is about being really curious when we're in nature and some penny is dropping or some insight is coming, rather than focusing on the insight, which might be, we've there are some that we just hear over and over, and they've almost lost the power. The insight of there are always seasons, seasons change, there's death and then there's life. But that's now us just telling it. At one point someone had an incredibly powerful experience when that insight first dropped in, but now we all kind of carry it with us and we just repeat it, versus really asking somebody and having that balance. Yes, you've got the almost like the byline, but what's the experience beneath that? What might you be feeling in your body to show you that there's been a shift? What images might be coming in your mind to really enforce the understanding of that shift? Certainly, there will be other thoughts. It might be memories come up, it might be plans for the future. So it's to think about the various layers that are happening within the experience that you're trying to write about. And for me, sometimes I like to imagine it as a recipe. So just as I might go up to my kitchen and I might open my recipe book to cook a really delicious meal, to me, writing's a little bit like a recipe too. I'm handing over an experience to the reader, but I'm thinking, what ingredients do I need to put in the pot first? And what are the different ingredients to enable them to have that experience? Otherwise, if we go back to the kitchen, let's say I've cooked a really delicious chickpea tagine, and I say to my guest, I've cooked a really delicious chickpea tagine, and they're like, great, when can I eat it? So that would be the telling versus, okay, come and sit down, and maybe I've lit some candles and I'm serving it out and they can smell it and they can see it. So I think the balance again is to almost think about that piece of writing as a recipe that you're handing over to the reader. So little by little, you're drawing them into your experience with a real clear sense of the experience that you want to give them. And that clarity may not be there for the first draft or the second draft or the 10th draft, but eventually you've got to really know, what is this recipe that I'm handing over, and what is the experience I want to give.
Yeah, it's a real you can't eat the menu situation. Yeah, so that's definitely a good analogy in that sense of, yeah, providing, just like you said, providing a way to get to an experience, but not necessarily, it's not a direct transmission of like, here's the meal in front of you just from reading or the recipe or something like that.
Yeah.
I'll sneak in, like, what are you reading now? Who are you, like a favorite? It could either be like a current read or just like a go-to kind of favorite author or book.
Yeah. I tend to read a fiction and a non-fiction. Uh, I love one of my most favorite things to do is to get into bed really early at like 8:30, so I know I've got a really good amount of time to read. Because I know some people, they're ready for bed and they go to bed and they pick up a book and maybe they read a page because they're exhausted. But for me, it's about, oh, tonight I'm going to be able to get to bed nice and early. And I tend, when I'm in bed and I'm just doing that before I go to sleep reading, I like to read something super simple, because my brain has been at work all day. So I'm just reading a very simple piece of crime thriller fiction. It's called Geneva, and it's by an actor, and I've completely forgotten his name. He was in Lord of the Rings. He's a British actor. It might come to me in a moment. But the other reason I'm doing this is because I'm working on this final edit of my novel. I don't want to read a voice that's going to really influence me. So I'm just reading to be entertained. I'm reading because I love reading. Um, Funnily enough, I've got a few books around me that I have utterly enjoyed recently. So I would love to shout them out if that's okay. Um,
Yeah, we love reading recommendations.
yeah,
Go for
so
it.
this one's on my desk because I finished it recently. This is Fall by West Camel. West is actually the editor at Arenda Press, which is a British small publishing house. They publish crime fiction, they publish suspense, but they also have a very small literary section on their list too. And the writing in that book is mesmerizing. It's The story is compelling, but for me, it was the writing. It was the way the story unfolded. It split timelines and it split point of view, which I always find really interesting. So I highly recommend that. There's one on my shelf. I wonder if I'm going to be able to reach it.
Yeah.
This is a non-fiction book. This is nature writing. Just, oh my goodness, absolutely blew my mind. Um, so Laura spent some time in the Bolivian rainforest at basically a big cat rescue reserve, and had the most incredible, it's a beautiful love story between her and the puma that she was looking after. And she's Laura's also a visual artist, and so the book, the description is utterly beautiful. Sometimes I read a book with description and I think the writer is hearing this. This is more about fancy words versus painting a picture. And, there's no right or wrong for both, because sometimes that kind of lush wordage can be gorgeous. But for Laura, she was painting a picture, and reading the book is like a meditation, because she's sitting for hours in the jungle babysitting this puma, and so the experience of reading it is a meditation. You're just sitting in nature, and yet it's gripping. It's slow, but it's also gripping. It's emotionally engaging. It's by far one of the best pieces of nature writing I've read.
Wow, I feel like I've seen the cover on Instagram or something, but I was not familiar with the actual book. It's a beautiful cover.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? Yeah.
Thanks for that. I didn't prepare you for the what are you reading question, but
well, luckily I'm in my office, and I'm I'm surrounded by books, so
it usually comes up. I wrote that one down, by the way.
Brilliant.
And then the other thing I definitely want to get to is another like connection point of like kind of see like writing as the central piece, and like how is it connected to this and this and this. But in terms of like either more generally like the healing process, like you mentioned with the prize, or one of the themes that's available to submitting work, or like a meditation practice, or something that is a somatic practice. How do they connect with your own writing practices? I have a meditation practice. I don't have a yoga practice, but personally, although I do like exercise, and I can see there's a connection there, but for me, it's not like a direct thing. It's not like, oh, I go for a jog and then I write, or I'm like, so it's not something like that. But overall, one thing would help the other. Would help the other thing. So I'm curious, like, as far as the work you're into and being a teacher in those areas, like how does that shake out for you?
I love this exploration. Thanks for the invitation. And the mention of meditation, but also movement, is really key here, and also healing as well. So I'm going to just thread them all together. Like I said, I used to manage a retreat for writers. So this was about 15 years ago, when I was a writer at that time, but I hadn't begun my journey as a facilitator. And as I was managing this retreat, I was seeing a lot of writers struggling. We ran about 46 retreats a year, and we had about 16 to 20 writers a week, and I was there for several years. So by the end of that time, I was thinking to myself, 70% of these writers are struggling. And we talked earlier about finding that creative path that's the path for us. And already at that point, the question, I know that for you, when you want people to submit to your journal, you're saying, we welcome questions. So for me, that question really guided me. What is at the root of this struggle? And it was a question that didn't let me go. And I found myself wanting to give advice to writers, but noticing that when I did give advice to them, they shut down. And I thought, that's really interesting. They want something, they want help, they don't want to be struggling, but what they don't want is advice. So there was another question there. They're struggling, but they don't want advice. And then, as we often know, and you've probably experienced this in your meditation practice, when you put that question out there, when you're open for a teacher, the teacher comes. And I very quickly met a woman who was a life coach. I'd heard of life coaching, but I didn't know what it was. And when I said to her, tell me a bit about life coaching, she said, well, it's non-advisory. And I thought, bingo, here's a modality that's going to help me hold space that isn't about giving advice. So that's where I began, Aaron. And life coaching isn't necessarily about healing, but life coaching is asking a very important question. What do you want? So when I started to ask writers that question, what I noticed was most people can't answer it. Most people struggle. Sometimes people start crying when I ask that question. Sometimes people take several sessions to be able to voice it. Some people don't know. Some people are frightened because they don't know. Some people want what other people want. So I knew that was tied up in the process of being a writer. I knew that was tied up in the process of healing. And then in the background, I did have a meditation practice. And so I was sitting on my meditation cushion and I was curious about my own writing journey, because it wasn't that I wasn't struggling. I certainly was, but I refused to accept the struggle as something that would always be there. And I refused to accept the struggle as the writer's lot. And I'm curious to know if this has been your experience with meditation. There's something about meditation that just slips you free of the way that thoughts want to hold you. And so whenever I would hear people talking in this way about writing, well, it's hard, it's difficult to make money, I would think to myself, if I was on my meditation, those would be thoughts that I'd be letting go, and I'd be waiting for something else to come into the experience. So I started to do that practice with all of the things that people said about writing, even though I didn't have an answer. And even though it felt very bold to say, I'm training people to never have a writing struggle, or I'm training people to never have block or to never procrastinate. But there was something in me that was leading me to that place. And certainly meditation was really at the center of that, because I've had experiences in my own practice of being right at the center of my creativity, and it feels pure and it feels effortless, and the words come, the feeling comes, and the feeling chooses the word from my mind, and I don't have to do anything. So it just pours and flows. And I know that's what everyone wants. Whenever I talk to a new client, I say, what do you want? I want it to be easy. I want it to flow. So now I've come to a place where I really understand that, as I mentioned earlier, creativity is energy flowing through us. Some people might call it chi, some people might call it prana, life force energy. And that energy flows through us and it interacts with the mind. And sometimes it can do what's called trigger the mind, as in the mind senses it and shuts it down. Or the mind says, oh, I know what you are. And then the mind starts writing. And then we might write something that's a little bit cliche, or we then might write something that we have huge doubts over. But there's a place in the creative process when, if you let the experience of creativity do the creating, I suppose from the language of the Wild Roof Journal, that's when it's called wild, because it's not coming through the filters of the mind. It's just coming from that pure source, from the center of the universe, or the center of nature. And so now I describe it as, if you think about a wind instrument like a flute, and you think about a flute that's just, it's been handmade and handcrafted, and it's really beautifully shaped, and it's been well tended to. The sound that blows through that flute, you don't have to fiddle around with it. It just, the wind blows through and then the sound comes. But most of us, whilst we were born like that flute, we got little dents along the way, we got little blockages. Perhaps we weren't well cared for, so some of the keys are a little bit wobbly. And so the work that I do, and my absolute purpose here, is to guide people to that place of being that pure wind instrument again. Because if we're wounded or dented and we're letting that creativity just flow through us, the sound that we're making is the sound that comes from our trauma. But if we go on that healing journey and then we let that creativity flow through us, the sound that we make is it's the sound of our true shape. And most people who are struggling, partly because they're making sound from their trauma. And what happens when we make sound from our trauma, we can feel blocked, but it also, the sound doesn't have the impact that we want it to have. So that might be that we're getting rejected. It might be that we're singing our song, but no one's taking any notice. And the physical or the movement or the exercise has become really important to me, because when I mentioned that dented flute, we grow up with these unconscious patterns in our body, and we've all got symptoms of it: stiff neck, stiff shoulders, tight hips. So those are all ways that we've unconsciously learned to hold our body, to suppress that sound that wants to come through us. So the chakra yoga that I teach is taking the body back to a holding pattern that's going to support that flow of energy through us. It's going to take that flute, take the dents out, clear it out, that sort of thing. So some kind of movement is always really important. It doesn't have to be yoga, but some kind of intentional movement where we're sensing into the body and almost we're remembering how the body was before shit happened to us.
Yeah, I love that explanation and the analogy. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, the word that came to mind was obscurations. We had on obscurations, and I think, yeah, that is an overlap. I think is the point
Yeah.
is to remove them. It's not so much adding on as a teacher, facilitator,
Yeah.
whoever. The point, or just the creative person, is not to add more on or add more to it. It's kind of to take some of it off.
Absolutely. I love
Um,
that.
and yeah, so
Yeah.
that definitely resonates with the stuff I'm into.
And also, actually, what that just made me think of, Aaron, is this adding stuff on. If we keep with that flute analogy, there are many writers out there who have the flute, but they've added all sorts of other contraptions onto it. So they might have put a funnel at the end to try to make it louder because they don't understand why they're not being heard. Or they've maybe put a tube between their mouth and the flute to because they can't blow into the flute directly. So that's often these sort of strategies. We've lost our original form, and then we've developed strategies for how to make our wounded form work, rather than the undoing of it all. And I suppose the final point is a lot of people feel like the creative process is a lot of effort and exhausting, or they don't have energy to do it. And that's usually a sign that there's a blockage in the flute. Because if there's a blockage in the flute and you're really having to puff down that flute, it is exhausting. So yeah, I love that. Just taking it all away.
Yeah, and yeah, that's exactly it. And yeah, sometimes we need and we need an addition for a limited amount of time and then take it away, but that doesn't always happen like that. It sticks.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and there's like a fun, since we're on analogies, I'll throw one out there and then we'll wrap up. But I think one of the fun kind of ways to just kind of like shift your perspective on it or something like that was like, did you brush your teeth this morning? And most people would say yes. And then it's like, are you still holding the toothbrush? So it's like, yeah, you need that for the time,
Yeah.
but that's not something we have an emotion. Most people don't have an emotional attachment to hanging onto the toothbrush all day.
Mm,
It's there when we need it for a couple of minutes, and then we set it down and don't think about it. So I don't know, that just popped into
yeah,
my
that's
head when you were
great.
talking about that kind of a thing.
And also that word that you used, stick, I think with the toothbrush, that's such a great analogy. We understand it's something that we pick up, it's something outside of ourselves. We do it consciously, whereas these habits that form around our creativity, we don't understand they're separate to us. We think they're a part of us because perhaps we believe ourselves not good enough, or we've got this incorrect perception of ourselves. So we're essentially seeing the toothbrush as part of us. So we don't understand, oh, I can put it down. Yeah, that one's really got me thinking. Thank you.
I know. Yeah, I know, but it's just kind of the exaggerated version because it's such a commonplace example,
Yeah,
and yeah, exactly, it gets more complex when you add on emotion to the to the
for
equation,
sure. Yeah.
as you would imagine. Um, a lot of times I ask as a closing point, as like a writing prompt or some kind of creativity exercise, but I think you said one already, so I'll throw it back at you, and you could, if you want to leave it, that's fine, and if you want to add more, go for it. But I think just the practice, or even you can maybe use it even just as a pretty straightforward writing prompt, is the question, "What do you want?"
Mm,
That I think that one stuck out to me, and that's
mm.
you know it's kind of one of those questions that's like an accordion. It can go, pretty simple and straightforward, and it can go real deep and complex.
Yeah.
But if you add your own twist, or how would you how would you advise somebody to use that for a creativity exercise, if there is a clear way to do that?
Yeah, I love that you picked that one out. And yeah, let's add a few more things to it to give it some context for people to pick up on. If let's say I'm working with a client and they don't know the answer to that question, I will say to them, go away and work on that for at least 2 weeks. So if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, yeah, I don't really know what I want, or oh, that question challenges me, it's journaling on that question every day, but you want to come at it slightly differently each day. So the question is the same, but you're coming one day and you're asking, what do I truly want? And then another day it's like, yeah, but what do I really want? And then if there was nothing standing in my way, what do I want? Or if I wouldn't be embarrassed about the answer, what do I want? Or if people wouldn't judge me, what do I want? So different variations, because what you'll notice is you'll start to ask it slightly differently. Now, what we can also add on to that is they might be, well, no, I know what I want. I want to make a living as a creative, and I'm working on a book length project at the moment. So you can refine it. You can say, what do you want when it comes to the outcome of this project? That's a really important question to ask. I can't tell you how many writers I chat with and they don't know, and then they're wondering why they're blocked. They haven't really pictured the book out in the world, or they're already saying to themselves, well, I probably won't sell that many copies. I'll probably just self-publish it, but the marketing's going to be really hard. And then they wonder why they're resisting. So I think if someone is in the middle of a creative project, it's really good to put that question in reference. So how do you want this project to turn out? What would be the ideal ending of this project? What would be the best case scenario? So we're really asking our creativity or our imagination to work for us. Because as you know, as someone who practices meditation, the mind will switch to the negative if we're not watching it. And so it's up to us to be gently overlooking the mind and saying, here's the train of thought that I'd like to put you onto. I can see where you want to go, but I'd like to just put you in this direction instead. So we're really making sure that our imagination is working for us. It's so ironic that as writers, as creatives, we often leave our imagination untended. And when we leave our imagination untended, chances are it gets fearful and anxious and worrisome. So, yeah, that just really gently doing the journaling, but imagining that you're overseeing that imagination and you're gently nudging it towards really what your heart desires, the best case scenario, and spending doesn't need to be long, 5 minutes a day for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. 4 weeks is even better. I think people will find something really beautiful coming out of that practice.
I think that's a good one. Yeah.
Nice.
I feel like we covered a lot of ground. We got to just about everything on my list over here.
Brilliant.
And I think it's probably a good time to dismount. And we'll talk again soon, I hope.
Yeah.
So the website again is gabrielablandy.org, and then you can see the Wild Muse Prize info, link to the Substack, all that other good stuff. So once again, thanks for joining me, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron, and thank you for your delicious questions.